Hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Ursula. I'm an indie author of historical fiction. I've been an avid reader since the age of 3. Today I'm going to be discussing this book, as I promised in a previous vlog. Now, I was alerted to the existence and recent publication of this book by Jewish Twitter soon after its release, and I read many positive reviews and impressions. It was also mentioned by one of the rabbis at the synagogue I live stream services from, seeing as how I've unfortunately been unable to go to shul in person since lockdown began in March 2020. Many of these people brought up Ms. Horn's sobering statement that more people can name 3 death camps than 3 Yiddish writers. Or if you are like one of the people who does know about Yiddish writers, generally I would assume you can't name more than the big 2 or 3 names like Isaac Bashevis, Singer, or Sholem Aleichem. And unfortunately, even many Jews also are not very familiar with Yiddish literature for one reason or another. The 12 essays in this volume make painfully clear how many Gentiles, often without, malicious ignorance or consciously being aware of it, they just genuinely don't know. They only know about us because of the Shoah and visiting heritage sites in places whose Jewish community has long since vanished. In other words, they know a lot about dead Jews, but not living Jews, either past living Jews or present living Jews. We also have to contend with Gentiles goy-splaining anti-Semitism to us, lying about and misrepresenting Jewish history, particularly our indigenous connection to the land of Israel and the Hebrew language. They happily believe any false information they hear because it's wrapped up in the guise of wokeness. They'll only listen to or elevate the voices of fringe tokens instead of proud, committed Jews trying to gaslight us. And unfortunately, I know this is a much more complicated topic for another vlog, but to make a long story short, there's been a huge explosion of public and social media anti-Semitism since May, and a lot of us feel very frightened, and the world is after the last 70 years is kind of an aberration. Now it's just returning to its normal modus operandi, where anti-Semitism is publicly acceptable and people can be as disgusting and hateful as they want, and nobody's going to chastise them for it because now it's woke to be anti-Semitic. And by the way, these woke anti-Semitism talking points they come straight from the Soviet Union's playbook. That's a whole topic for another discussion. So anyway, Ms. Horn's first chapter, Everyone's Second Favorite Dead Jew, opens by talking about how an employee of the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam was told not to wear a kippah, the skull cap, to work in 2018. The previous year, visitors noticed Hebrew was the only language in the audio guide displays without a national flag next to it, which is kind of bitterly ironic given that this is a museum about the Holocaust and going into hiding because of Judaism. The rest of the chapter discusses how Anne's diary has been so popular and palatable to the masses around the world and people of all ages, largely because it's not about the Shoah at all. It's just about the experience of being in hiding and a young girl coming of age. Had Anne lived and written about her experience in the camps, it's doubtful she would have found such a receptive audience as an imagined obituary for her dying in the age of 92 makes painfully clear. She also wrote the famous line about everyone being good at heart before she met people who weren't good, so possibly she would have totally rethought those words and repudiated them if she had survived. The next best known Shoah memoir, Elie Wiesel's Night, is full of rage in the original Yiddish. Only after it was published in French and transformed into a story of theological angst did it gain widespread notice. In other words, many Gentiles look to Shoah memoirs for feel-good inspiration and are deeply uncomfortable when they don't follow that socially accepted mold. And of course, I'm not saying they're doing this because they hate us or delicious malignant ignorance or anything like that. It's just this is what they've come to expect, and it makes them uncomfortable when something is outside of what they're used to, particularly because bystanders and silent collaborators did play a huge role in the Shoah, like it or not, and that's a very difficult, painful conversation it's important to have. Chapter 2, Frozen Jews, concerns the history of Harbin, China, which had a large flourishing Jewish community from 1898 till the 1950s. The last Jewish family left in 1962, and Harbin's last Jew died in 1985. There were many Harbinsi, as they called themselves, fondly recall their lives in the city. There were also many pogroms, particularly after white Russian refugees arrived in 1919 and brought their violent anti-Semitism with them. Among their vile acts was burning a synagogue. The city's golden age lasted less than one generation. Then came the Japanese occupation in the 1930s, and the situation became even worse. Many people viewed immigration as inevitable because of how difficult life was, despite how they romanticize it now, or even at the time they enjoyed where they were living. Now Harbin's remaining synagogue is a typical heritage site paying homage to the former Jewish community. with no mention of just why everyone left. And that's typical of a lot of, heritage sites around the world. They'll like talk about, oh, what a wonderfully rich, beautiful Jewish community we used to have, and look at the cemetery and the synagogues and like a Jewish hospital or something like that. But they don't mention the systemic, institutionalized anti-Semitism and pogroms, which was why there's no Jewish community anymore. Like maybe like a handful of people who are very elderly. The displays also only have photos and captions about the minority of rich and bourgeois residents, not the poor and proletarian majority who could only dream of like servants and grand society events. Chapter 4, Executed Jews, talks about the Soviet Union's persecution and eventual purging of Jewish writers, artists, actors, and playwrights. They were allowed to remain at liberty after Stalin's crackdown on Yiddish only because they served as useful tokens, and they had to publicly repudiate and make fun of Jewish culture and Jewish religion in the plays they put on and the books and stories they wrote. So it's basically classic Hanukkah anti-Semitism as opposed to Purim anti-Semitism. Hanukkah anti-Semitism purports to like and respect us, but demands we dutifully assimilate and abandon our faith and culture. So basically, give up what makes us actually Jewish and just like be like some whitewashed like face in the masses. Purim anti-Semitism openly declares its belief that we're inferior and their intent to murder us. Chapter 5, Fictional Dead Jews, discusses the differences between Jewish and Gentile literature, many of which I myself wasn't particularly like consciously aware of either. Traditionally, many Jewish novels end without an uplifting, redemptive, happy ending, and might not even have like a consistent plot. It's more episodic, a journey through life, which also is kind of how I write. But I know that's also like influenced by classic European and world literature too, not particularly like contemporary literature. But again, that's obviously a story for a different vlog. But instead, many Jewish novels are morally ambiguous or even depressing. Given Jewish history, it's easy to see why they would follow this pattern. Now, I got a lot of great authors and books to add to my TBR list from this chapter, so I'm going to look them at. Some of them are available in translation. Chapter 6, Legends of Dead Jews, discusses the urban myth about surnames being changed at Ellis Island. A lot of people react with anger and disbelief when they're presented with undeniable historical and documentary proof that this never happened. They cherish their family stories about stupid clerks changing the spelling or inventing an entirely new name. And unfortunately, some novels and films perpetuate this myth too. It really makes me angry when like I see this, because we know there's like no evidence this ever happened. And what really happened was that many immigrants felt compelled to change their obviously Jewish names due to systemic institutionalized anti-Semitism. Other groups of immigrants like Italians, Greeks, Germans, and Ukrainians typically kept their names, or at most might like change the spelling to make the pronunciation more obvious or look a little bit less foreign and more anglicized. Jewish name changers routinely cited difficulties in finding jobs, being accepted at schools, being allowed to stay at hotels, and housing. They also claimed their names were unpatriotic, too foreign, uneuphonious, meaning they didn't really sound nice, cumbersome, annoying, uncomfortable, hard to spell and pronounce, embarrassing, and a hindrance to employment, education, social acceptance, and housing. Rarely did they cite the obvious clear culprit, anti-Semitism. The only name changers who mentioned this were Christians with Jewish-sounding names, and they didn't want to be mistaken for Jews. And so instead of challenging this unfair system, or just at least keeping their last names and being brave and standing up for who they were, they just meekly submitted to it. Unfortunately, this didn't really start changing until I guess the 1950s and 60s, when we got started gritting greater interfaith dialogues and friendships. Chapter 8, On Rescuing Jews and Others, is by far the longest. I was surprised Ms. Horn believes barely anyone has heard of Varian Fry, one of only 5 Americans to date honored by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations. And Yad Vashem means hand and name. It's a Holocaust Memorial Museum in Jerusalem I've been to on all 3 of my trips to Israel, and Baruch Hashem, it would be like a great honor if after I make Aliyah, hopefully next year, if all goes according to plan, if I could work there too. And I've known about this guy, Varian Fry, for years, even if I didn't know too many details for now. I basically thought like everyone who knows a lot about, the Holocaust and the righteous among the nations who rescued us knew who he was, or at least about his name. Mr. Fry rescued several thousand people. He was working in Marseille, France, and all these people he were rescued were like famous writers, artists, and intellectuals, and like philosophers, and I guess some scientists too, and their families by extension, like from Marc Chagall, Franz Werfel, and Leon Feuchtwanger, I believe them. I hope I'm not mispronouncing any of these names, but like she goes on to like discuss why like none of these people really wanted to like acknowledge him in later years after he like stuck his neck out so much to save their lives, and goes on like, what about like he had a very troubled life after the war, and like, and despite how some people believe people who rescued Jews were like very happy people with like great purpose in life, and Mr. Fry wasn't like that at all. I mean, it does kind of feel like it gets rambly and like loses like the point it's trying to make, because it is so long. It could have used more concise editing, or at least like a different like route it was taking. But anyway, it was very good. And I mean, obviously, there's a lot more points raised in this book than I can get to in a fairly short vlog, so I do recommend, obviously, like reading it. I'm just giving you like a little surface of what everything is in there. Chapter 9, Dead Jews of the Desert, discusses Diarna, a virtual museum documenting vanished Jewish communities, primarily in the Middle East and Southwest Asia. Diarna is a Judeo-Arabic word meaning our homes. Some of the synagogues and other places documented have now been destroyed by wars, like the gorgeous 500-year-old synagogue of Damascus. Due to Ashkenazocentrism, many people don't know what a huge, vibrant Jewish presence there was in this part of the world until the ethnic cleansing following World War II, and about 850,000 Jews were forced to flee, or like felt like compelled. There was no life for them anymore in like countries like Iraq, Yemen, Egypt, Morocco, Libya, Algeria, Iran, all sorts of places. Most of them went to Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and like a fairly like substantial minority also like went to the U.S. and Canada and Britain, like places like that. But most have settled in Israel. Jews living in Muslim lands were also subject to dimitude, a legal, humiliating second-class status, and that's a topic for a whole other vlog too. Jews and Christians and other non-Muslims who lived in like Muslim countries were called dhimmi, and it was like they couldn't do a lot of things, and they had to pay like big tax, and so basically there wasn't much incentive for them to like, remain who they were and live in these places. So that's why many of them immigrated the first chance they got. Chapter 10, Blockbuster Dead Jews, is about Shoah museums and the traveling exhibit Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away. Ms. Horn was very uncomfortable with this exhibit because despite it did an absolutely fantastic job with the history, but it once again ultimately used the Shoah as a lesson about love and feel-good inspiration. And all these museums, which do wonderful work also for, I mean, a lot of Gentiles may come away with the impression that like Jewish history and our people are being reduced to the Shoah, and they don't know like anything else about us. And it also tends to leave out like testimonies soaked with rage at all the bystanders and collaborators who made this happen, instead of saying, oh, I learned I just need to love everybody, and this was a feel-good moment of inspiration. That's not what the Shoah was about for most people, unfortunately, and that's, uncomfortable fact that isn't generally broached in like Holocaust literature and museums and memoirs, or at least ones that are like published and translated into English. It's a different story in Yiddish and Hebrew. Chapter 11, Commuting with Shylock, is obviously about The Merchant of Venice and explores the cruel reality of Venetian Jewish history. Ms. Horn found that people who critique the play as irredeemably anti-Semitic are called whiny, vulgar censors and too PC, and of course have anti-Semitism goy-splained to them, while Jewish scholars who declare it nuanced or not at all offensive are lovingly praised, which, is kind of typical. Chapters 3, 7, and 12 discuss the shooting attacks on U.S. synagogues in recent years. Although many of us do feel like we're getting back to normal now after the last 70 years of interfaith dialogue, at least now there's, community outrage after these events, and people like come to our rescue and help the Jewish community instead of like generally excusing it or celebrating it. So we do have more, a lot more friends now in the Gentile and non-Jewish world, thankfully, than we did at the time of the Shoah. The final of these Dead American Jews chapters reveals the shocking fact that many news stories about the attack on the Jersey City kosher grocery defended the shooter's motives and tried to put them in an understandable context. They claimed, they were just angry and frustrated about gentrification, school zoning, and Hasidic Jews moving in. Oh, God forbid, like Jews or religious Jews move into our neighborhood. Yet these news outlets never justify like hate crime attacks on like black churches, gay nightclubs, or stores with a big Latino customer base, nor do they show sympathy for the murders. That was just like, my jaw was practically hanging open when I read that. That's just horrible. Ms. Horn concludes by talking about Daf Yomi, the worldwide Talmud study group that studies one page back and front, and they are pretty large, of Talmud every day. When this study cycle ends after 7 years, there's a huge worldwide celebration, and then it starts all over again. I unfortunately have never participate in that, although I have like studied some Talmud on and off over the years. But I would love to start participating officially when the next cycle starts in 2027. And traditionally, only like men and often like only older men would study Talmud, but now, of course, many women study it too, and you don't have to have like a certain level of education or background. Just start studying where you are, and you'll learn more as you go along, and just be a wonderful part of this worldwide community. I highly recommend this book to everyone. Many of the insights might make Gentiles uncomfortable, but these are important conversations we need to have for the sake of healthy, positive interfaith relations. Oh, and read more Yiddish and Hebrew literature. And I also am looking, hopefully, if I can find any Ladino literature, which, as I mentioned before, Judeo-Spanish. And there's also many other like Jewish languages, like Judeo-Provençal, Judeo-Italian, Portuguese, all sorts of like languages all over the world. It's hard to come up with an exhaustive list, but they did all have literature in them too, although it's harder to find and then translated into English. Now, thank you for listening to the end of this vlog. I really appreciate my viewers and people who are giving me positive, encouraging comments. I do feel like I'm growing in confidence at talking to the camera and becoming less rambling. In my next few vlogs, hopefully I will be doing some of my Dantean posts I've written on my blog and just like speaking them into like vlog form. Some of them will require or be enhanced by like the insertion of pictures, like for example like gay men and women and religious minorities in the Divine Comedy, so I will need some help for that because, as I've said, unfortunately I can only shoot in QuickTime for the moment and can't do iMovie yet, so I can't insert like images on my own computer for the moment, but I am looking forward to doing more posts about Dante and the Divine Comedy in future. And so thank you very much for listening and for all your positive comments. I'll hopefully see you guys again on Wednesday. Thanks. Bye.